I would consider myself to be as ordinary and boring as white bread. I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan here. Growing up, I was not really the kind of person who went out and did a lot of partying. I didn't have exposure to really any of the common drugs that a lot of my peers may have had a chance to experiment with going through high school and college and things like that. My experience with really any kind of drugs didn't begin until I had my cancer diagnosis. I grew up on a farm. I moved to the big city to go to school. I decided that information technology was sort of my thing, and I've been a computer guy for, gosh, as long as I can remember. So I've always really been somebody who has been interested in technology and finding answers and things like that. I've always been sort of an explorer in terms of intellectual pursuits, but I didn't really have a whole lot of experience in things like spiritual pursuits. I've never really considered myself to be particularly religious. Although the idea of looking for our place in the universe and things like that had some appeal to me, I never really had a lot of opportunity to dive very deep into that sort of a thing. I've been married now for, gosh, 27 years to an amazing woman who puts up with me very well, which I very greatly appreciate. We have a couple of children, a daughter and a son, so we kind of lucked out and got one of each on the first try, which is pretty impressive in itself. I guess that would be sort of characteristic as one of the ways that I would describe myself. I am literally the luckiest person that I know. I have had opportunities in my life to do amazing things that other people never get the chance to do. I'm adopted. I have had a chance to find my biological family. I have been a stem cell donor on the Unrelated Bone Marrow Registry. I have had a chance to go to national science fairs and compete in drama competitions and things like that in high school. So my whole life has just been this amazing stream of incredible events that I would consider statistically improbable. They're things that most people will never get a chance to experience in their lifetime, and I have been so incredibly lucky to have the chance to do these things. Getting cancer, although it seems like it is something that is completely negative, I have learned so much from having cancer, and I've had the chance to experience parts of my life that you would just never imagine could come out of an experience like that. I've met amazing people and been exposed to philosophies and things like that that have enhanced my life in so many ways. In spite of having a terminal diagnosis, there is an awful lot to be gained from a negative sort of an experience like that. In spite of having a terminal diagnosis, there is an awful lot to be gained from a negative sort of an experience like that. Really happened in about 2018 or so. I just happened to come across the research from the Johns Hopkins study while I was looking into a therapy for treating my neuropathy, which was a side effect I had from my chemotherapy that I'd had in early 2016. So in 2018, I was not really experiencing the type of end-of-life anxiety that I would experience in a couple of years. It was a piece of information that I was made aware of, but didn't really have a use for it. I'm kind of a pack rat when it comes to information and things. I tend to do a lot of reading and a lot of research into different rabbit holes and things like that. Things that I just find really interesting. So when I found this in 2018, I just kind of filed it away as an interesting thing that I didn't really have much use for. It wasn't until later in 2019 to 2020 that I had this really active resurgence of my cancer, which I had been thinking was very well under control between 2017 to that 2019 period. And that is when I was really introduced to just how life-sucking end-of-life anxiety can really be. I remembered the research that I had looked into, and because I have been exposed to a lot of different things, I knew that antidepressants and behavioral therapy and mindfulness and things like that were really only limited in their effectiveness for being able to deal with anxiety for me. And so I looked into it a little further, and a better look at that was telling me that the research was offering like these 80% success rates for people who were suffering from exactly the same condition that I was suffering from, namely end-of-life distress with stage 4 cancer. Of course, being somebody who really has a lot of faith in science and results, that seemed really reasonable for me to pursue that as a potential option. In the summer of 2019, I was getting some symptoms back that I was not experiencing for some time. I had had a successful surgery in 2017, and my doctors were telling me that they thought that they had all of my cancer taken care of at that point. Recognizing there isn't a cure for stage 4 cancer, but they believed that they had gotten everything there was to get. And so I was having these regular PET scans every 3 months. PET scans being what they consider to be the best tool for being able to detect cancer. Getting these clear scans every 3 months, I was really under the impression that everything was going great. So when I started to get symptoms in 2019, it was a little disconcerting. I wasn't really too sure what was going on there. I had a colonoscopy, and during that colonoscopy we found 2 bleeding tumors on my large intestine. So I realized then that it was possible that there might be a way for a tumor or two to get past the PET scans. And so we scheduled a surgery for the summer of 2019 with the intention of taking out the rest of the large intestine, and we thought that would be the end of it. Unfortunately, in that surgery, they opened me up and they looked in like 51 different places in my abdomen and found cancer in 42 of those 51 places. So where we expected it was going to be, again, a fairly straightforward surgery, it turns out that the cancer at that point was so extensive they couldn't do anything at all for it, and they just closed things back up, and I am no longer eligible for surgery as an option. So waking up from that surgery expecting to have a good result, and finding out that my treatment options are now extremely limited, was well, it was a real shock, to say the least. A very disheartening way to wake up from what you're hoping is going to be a successful surgery, to find out that they have literally not been able to do anything at all. And chemotherapy is going to be the only option available to you, but they're not really expecting any results out of that. Following that surgery, I went home. I started chemotherapy after a recovery period. In November, my mother-in-law passed away. My father-in-law, who also had stage 4 cancer, came to live with us, and he passed away in December, so about a month after that. And the following April, my own father passed away, and a couple of weeks after that, my niece, who had adrenal cancer, passed away. And a couple of weeks after that, the person who I had donated stem cells to, like 17 years prior, she passed away as well. So in this span of like 6 months, I found out that I had advanced stage 4 cancer, and I've had all of these people who are passing away around me. And the reality of the end of my life really just crashed in on me like a ton of bricks, I guess would be the best way to put it. And I did not have a set of tools to be able to deal with that at all. So when I say that I was having end of life anxiety, that is really where my end of life anxiety was coming from. Was just this overwhelming tidal wave of death that was surrounding me. And again, I did not have any tools at my disposal that could deal with that. And so I started looking for something new that I had not had exposure to. And remembering, of course, this research from the Johns Hopkins study, I started looking into that as an option out of a deep desire to try to get some semblance of my life back in order, because what was going on for me at that point was a lack of ability to function on a day-to-day basis. My anxiety functionally isn't really any different from anybody else's. I wouldn't want to give you the impression that I think I'm special or different or anything like that. I think everybody who suffers from anxiety most certainly would feel the same sort of things that I was feeling at that time. And that would depend, from one day to the next. One day I might have to stay in a quiet, dark room because, just a little bit of extra input would be overwhelming for me, and I wouldn't be able to deal with it. When you have cancer like I do, and you are aware that you may get a rupture in an intestine or a blockage or things like that, then of course any little ache or pain that you may get must be something very terrible happening with the cancer. And so I would have days where a gas cramp or something like that would give me such a panic attack that I would have to be around somebody all the time just in case I happen to fall over dead. That sort of a state of crippling anxiety like that is really where I was at when I started looking for some place in Canada that could offer the psilocybin as part of a clinical trial or an underground therapist, which I gotta tell you, are not really that easy to find. For my first psychedelic assisted therapy session, we did the session here in my own home. I had Dr. Tobin sitting on one side, and I had my good friend John sitting on the other. I'm waiting for my psilocybin to kick in. We have decided that in the interest of easing me into the experience, we're going to take my psilocybin in a series of smaller doses. So I took an initial 2.5 grams and started to meditate, waited for about 45 minutes, and really was not feeling any effects of that at all. So I took another 2.5 grams and went back into my meditative state. And after another 45 minutes or so, I think I was probably beginning to feel the onset of the psilocybin, but not really in any profound or strong way. So we decided to take another 2 grams of psilocybin at that point. So that brought me up to a total of 7 grams of psilocybin mushrooms for my first experience. And following that, of course, the psilocybin did start to take effect. And I noticed fairly early on some of the side effects from the psilocybin. I get a lot of chills. I get a lot of shivering in my legs in particular. So I would call it a twitchiness. Music that I was listening to started to have a lot more depth and began to cross over into some of my other senses. So it began to be a synesthetic experience for me over probably the next half hour or so. So I started to get a lot of visuals in terms of colors and patterns. I was aware that a body existed, and I would sort of come back and check on it from time to time, sort of the way you would check on a pet or a houseplant or something like that. It wasn't really something that I identified as me at that point, but I did know that there were maintenance issues. Am I too hot? Am I too cold? Does it need to have a sip of water? Does it need a bathroom break? Things like that. So for me, it was a very conscious manual process when I had periods of awareness to come back and do things like that. So very normal for me to completely lose my identity. I had no idea that I had a wife or children, let alone what their faces looked like or their names or any other thing that was associated with this life. But it was a continuation of consciousness. So it was like this transition from a waking state to sort of an expanded dreamlike state, but there wasn't that interim bit of sleep to discontinue the consciousness. It was just this continuous change of consciousness from one state into another. For me, that was probably one of the more therapeutic aspects of the experience. Up until that point, I had sort of considered this idea of life after death as being sort of academic. And, you read about it and hear people talk about it and things like that. But this was a real tangible experience of how my consciousness could exist in a way that has nothing to do with this life. But every bit of that experience was very positive and fulfilling for me. It gave me a lot of comfort to think that the transition from living to dying might be something like that, where it is this transition of consciousness from one state to another rather than an ending. And that was really something that I needed from that experience. Probably one of the most profound and life-enhancing things that I got out of that experience was this idea that consciousness has a continuity to it. For a number of weeks after you have a psilocybin experience, you get these aha moments, is what I would call them. And frankly, some of them seem, forehead slappingly straightforward and obvious. But when you have the emotional component that a psychedelic experience can give you, you get this emotional validation of these simple thoughts. I am really very happy with who I am, and a good chunk of that has to do with the way that I have evolved my view of who I am through the use of psychedelic assisted therapy. And I've really come to the conclusion that in that moment I may have been experiencing consciousness from the perspective of my cancer. And I remember having this desire to feel included and a part of the whole, and feeling like I was separated from that. At that same time, I remember having the question, do you really think I want to be here? And for me, it makes total sense. My cancer is a part of me. It isn't a part of me that is out to get me. And I realized that perhaps I need to have empathy in terms of my cancer rather than fighting the cancer, which is a part of me. You can never successfully fight yourself. It's not even productive to try to do that. So that has had sort of a change in the trajectory of how I try to treat my cancer. I'm now focused on trying to get rid of the source of that, which I believe is my poor handling of stress and things like that. It's really just talking about the experience and discussing how different elements of that have meaning for you in whatever ways those happen to be. It is straight up a life-changing experience. There isn't any other way to put it. So I went from this state where I was having difficulty getting out of bed, dealing with any kind of life at all. I would describe myself at that point of really not actively participating in the life that I was living. I was alive, but not really living my life. The noise in my head was so overwhelming that I just couldn't deal with anything else. Psychedelics turned that noise and anxiety off. It literally turned it off like a tap. And the way that it did that was so very incredibly effective. It was difficult for me to accept how very good it was. But since having that experience and having a number of other ones, I've come to realize that, yeah, for me, they really are that effective of a tool. And, I now say that I have gone from actively dying to actively living. I'm present in the moment. I appreciate all of the little things that you usually don't even pay attention to. I spend time with my family. I, talk to my kids about how their day was. All of these little things that you take for granted. And in all honesty, before my psychedelic experience and before my cancer, before any of that, these were things that I was literally just not appreciating in my own life at all. So psychedelics have improved my life in ways that I never expected.